out together. But as I thought about today, and I thought about kind of what would business and HR leaders really want to understand about AI, and what's kind of the role of leadership in driving AI. For me, there's really kind of three areas that we're going to break this down. So I know this is AI, but I don't have any demos. I'm not a deep fake. This is actually really me. I won't be using Gen AI and speaking in different languages. I only have a couple in my repertoire, and I don't have any slides because I really wanted to have a discussion. But when I think about these, I think about three key areas that we need to understand, and I'll double click into each of them. The first is the hype is real, but the history is important. AI has huge, tremendous value, but there's a history we have of overhyping change, and we've got to address the people and the regulatory and the ethical components. The second is, for this to succeed, we as leaders and we as colleagues have to create an environment where we can experiment, where we can play, and then embed AI in our core business processes. And thirdly, whatever you do around AI and whatever you do around kind of business and strategy today, you've got to have an agile plan. Whatever you invest in today, whatever use cases, whatever training, whatever re-engineering, whatever outcomes you're trying to drive, they will flex based on the external environment, based on advances in technology. So having an agile plan is really the order of the day. So I'll double click into each of those. So the hype is real. As you've seen, many firms have predicted AI as a great driver of growth, economic growth. In one of our studies, we predicted that AI would drive 15.7 trillion of increased GDP. Other consulting firms have come up with similar numbers. So there's a big hype there, and this was all pre-ChatGPT. As many of you've seen, it's been 11 months since ChatGPT was released. We've been playing with it, I'm sure, on our personal devices. I'm sure our children have been playing with it. Less so in the work environment, and we'll talk more about experimentation, etc. But the hype is real. There's huge investments going to this space. The hype cycle around investments is probably peaked, but the hype cycle around usage is still there. If you think about one of the huge vendors, OpenAI has now signed an agreement where they've been partly acquired by Microsoft. So OpenAI, the firm that gave us ChatGPT, which continues to evolve now from pure text to now creating pictures to now creating their own version of an app store, OpenAI is now embedded into Microsoft products. So very soon, all of us who use Microsoft products, and this is not an advert for Microsoft, will be able to use something called Copilot. So when we're working with our spreadsheets and our PowerPoints, it will actually give us advice in the same way you get advice on Netflix on what you want to do, or Amazon, etc. So wherever we see it, it's real. It has huge economic growth potential. Huge investments are going into this. Every major technology, whether it's Workday, Salesforce, Amazon Web Services, Microsoft, it was mentioned, Google, has their version of an equivalent of AI and ChatGPT. But when I say the hype is real and the history is important, the history really is important. We've been down this path before. Robotic process automation was something that was introduced about 5 to 7 years ago in a number of corporations, which was really about automating repeated tasks. We didn't get the collective benefits that we thought because out of that, and many transformations that have been technology driven and moving to the cloud have not delivered on the business benefits that were promised. Why? Because it's really easy for technologists and business people to implement technology. It's really hard for them to reimagine the work, do the hard work of redesigning the work, the processes, figuring out where technology can augment the process, redesign the process, clarify the role, take a horizontal view, and think about the outcomes. We have a huge hope and a prayer sometimes that technology will be the panacea, and history has shown us that's not the case. So we've really got to understand when we're implementing AI, it's about augmenting the process, it's about redesigning the process, it's about thinking about the end-to-end outcomes. What are you trying to achieve from your recruitment process? What are you trying to achieve from your call center experience where you might be using chatbots? When I say everyone's interested in this, It's not just investors, it's not just business leaders and corporations, but obviously governments. So we would have all seen that on both sides of the pond, governments have been very public in the last week about AI. And so they're really focused on safety, on traceability, on explainability, etc. In plain English, governments realize that left to their own devices, tech firms and businesses will not be able to control some of the unintended consequences. You've all heard about algorithmic bias, where you've got different data sets in your AI, which could lead to unfortunate, unintended outcomes, whether it's hiring the wrong people, or through resume screenings, not giving credit to a minority because there isn't sufficient data in the training base. So it has real challenges around bias. It also has real challenges if robots become more powerful than humans, and that feels very science fiction like, but it's possible. I took a class at Stanford on AI for a 6-day intensive class where we covered many topics. There is a possibility, if in the wrong hands and the wrong actors and the wrong criminal or state actors, that AI actually could be programmed to, and especially the robots part of it, to be actually more powerful than humans. So governments are very wisely jumping in with business, to figure this out. So the second thing I want, so that's around the height and the history. In many times, because a lot of our people are in London, this is very Dickensian in terms of it's the best of times, the worst of times. There's so much excitement that you hear from clients, from business people, from tech firms, from young people experimenting with the technology. But it can also be really the worst of times if we're not implementing it in the right way, which really leads me to my second point. The second point is AI will only succeed if we create an environment where we can actually go back to being children and learn, experiment, play, and then embed AI. And so what do I mean by that is, first of all of us have to go to school on this technology. So the first thing you've got to do is start playing with it. Generative AI is obviously the big buzzword. ChatGPT is something that many of us have played with. If you haven't, you should be playing with. It has, many great applicability in terms of summarizing content, in terms of, generating first drafts. There's obviously got to be some guardrails around this. Think about your children in school, with their homework and their essays. There've got to be guardrails there. There've got to be guardrails in business in terms of who owns the IP, which is the reason why many firms are creating their own private versions of data called large language models, and it's kind of private and not accessed on ChatGPT. But the first thing you got to do is go in and learn some of that technology. So it's about Gen AI, but there's so much other components of AI that can be learned. So understanding the buzzwords from, I mentioned Copilot. Copilot's a product that's going to be coming out from Microsoft, but it's also an important term when we think about AI. Think about driverless cars. Those of you who have experienced or understand driverless cars, there's a pure driverless car, but there's also the ability for the driver to take over. So a co-pilot. And so many people think about a financial advisor that will use a robo-advisor to understand patterns and make recommendations around their client's portfolio allocation, but ultimately the financial advisor will make the decision. That's an example of, augmented or co-pilot. So think about AI as a way to not fully automate for certain processes, but to actually augment. And so really understanding the buzzwords from co-pilot to augmented to, ethical AI, where we talked about kind of algorithmic bias. The other buzzwords that are important to understand is something called use cases. Every business right now is working on AI use cases. So in HR, they could be, how do we reimagine the end-to-end hiring process, and where do we use AI in terms of resume screening? Where do we use AI in terms of prediction of success in performance management? So we really got to understand kind of the use cases. How do you think about client onboarding if you're a B2B business? How do you think about credit, loan adjudication if you're in financial services? So thinking about use cases, which is basically what everyone's doing right now. Everyone is looking at use cases trying them out in different parts of their business, and then looking to scale. So taking a very agile approach, and we could talk more about that. What they're also doing is, the big buzzword is experimentation. Everybody knows that they're very early stage, but they've got to dip their toe in the ocean here and start thinking about which parts of their business would benefit from AI, whether it's chatbots in the call center, whether it's assistance in making strategic decisions around investments, whether it's predictions around kind of market success of a product that gets launched. So it has many different applicability, but many firms are now in this experimentation stage. The other things we've got to do is learn and practice and experiment responsibly. But like any technology or any business process that gets built separate from business, it's got to be embedded back in business. And that's really the work that I do. So I'm not an AI expert, but what I do is I help companies transform. I help companies reimagine their operating models and their business using technology, using new ways of working. When I'm working with clients and helping them think about new product development, or how to launch better client onboarding if they're a business-to-business client, I think about AI in the context of that. So how do they actually work with their clients? How do they actually plug in and use AI or machine learning where it's appropriate, as part of that design? If I'm redesigning an HR call center, it's about what's the process, what's the service level agreements, what the roles and responsibilities, what's the capacity model of the call center. But obviously, we're going to be using chatbots. We're not going to be using as many humans. We have to train the chatbots on the data. We have to make sure that that data is quality. But it's part of an overall call center solution. It's not just chatbots, and we're not going to be fully going to a fully automated call center anywhere right now for any business process. So it's really important to embed this back into your business process, your function, and make it part of daily business. But we are very, very early right now. Right now, the big buzzwords are use cases, experimentation, learning. Let's make sure that we're looking at the outcomes, that there are not unintended consequences of bias, or the whole aspects of responsible AI. And then the final point I mentioned was, we've got to have an agile plan. So whatever we build today is going to have to change. And so one of the first things to do is to really manage expectations with your stakeholders, starting with your employees and customers, of course, to understand how you're using AI, how you're thinking about responsible AI, what exists within your training data in your large language models, what your policies are around ChatGPT in your firm or on your personal devices. And spoiler alert, many firms are leading in a conversation about AI, but many of those same firms, especially in financial services where I spend a lot of my time, are not actually allowing ChatGPT to be used for business purposes yet, because they're really concerned about the regulatory and the quality kind of aspects of it. And so it is a case of like really communicating expectations on how it's being used. The other things you've got to do is with any technology, you've really got to have a good risk and resilience plan. So whether it's chatbots that are giving the wrong answers and actually going to cause patient harm if you're in healthcare, or other aspects of kind of ethical dilemmas because of AI. If you've not given a loan, if you've given the wrong healthcare diagnosis, if you've given the wrong response, if you're in travel and transportation, you've really got to understand the risks. And when there are errors, you've got to go into classic crisis management mode and over communicate, over correct, and address. And there will be errors, because this is a new technology, and we really need to kind of figure that out, and firms need to have a crisis response plan. The other things that are really important are, and again, it will resonate with this audience, is we've got to bring all the stakeholders along. There's fear and anxiety. In the surveys that we do, younger people are actually excited about this and really want to start playing with it and think it can actually think it can actually enhance their productivity and they can build skills for the future. Those that have less access to technology and are kind of victims of a digital divide or a unskilled labor are absolutely petrified about this. If you work in a call center and you hear the term chatbots and you think that that's your only role. So there is a really important point around bringing people along and based on your policies, giving everyone an opportunity to upskill. That's one thing that firms can do. They can invest in training, whether that's administered by their own firm or the many external sources. And then the other point around the plan is leaders have to execute this within their functions. Absolutely. So the finance team have to think about where they can use AI within finance. The salespeople have to think about it. But if we listen to the lessons of history, if we don't look at this horizontally and actually say, if we're doing a campaign in marketing, how do we actually think about that campaign horizontally from the customer in and understand what the salespeople need to do, what the finance people need to do, if there's any other participants involved, if we don't think about it horizontally and use it as an opportunity to bust some of the silos that exist, especially in large organizations, we won't reap the benefits of the technology. So in conclusion, that the three key areas I just want to reinforce is there's a lot of hype, there's a lot of expectations. I am very bullish on this technology, but I think it will take a lot longer to implement and scale, and there'll be lots of learnings along the way. And humans don't change as fast as we expect. We always overhype the business cases of technology, and so I'm cautiously very optimistic, more optimistic than other technologies I've seen. We have to create that experimentation and that playground, and we all have to kind of go on that journey ourselves. Every senior leader I know is rolling up their sleeves and being much more execution focused, whether it's on AI or other details of their business today. And this is no different. And then thirdly, whatever plan we have today, we've got to know that it needs to be agile in every respect, in how we communicate, how we think about responses to risk, how we think about busting silos, and then any other curveballs that get thrown at us externally or internally in our businesses. And we've got to think about how can AI help us, in that respect.